Hi, I'm Jude English. I'm one of the directors of Green Women's Declaration Limited, which is the new format of Green Women's Declaration. I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping, as it were, and a little reflection on stuff that's happened in the Green Women's Declaration in the last few weeks. Some of you may have noticed that we applied for a stall at Green Party conference. Now, we've been planning behind the scenes for a long time to go to conference. We'd taken some legal advice and we applied for a conference stall in June. We received from the party very little communication, sending them several emails. And then eventually I got in touch with the new CEO, Harriet. We had a few brief emails and we had an agreement that we would get a stall. Sadly, as soon as that agreement had been made public, we know that a great many individuals inside the party decided that they would campaign very, very heavily to make sure that we were not allowed inside. And this, I'm going to call it bullying. Bullying and misinformation and all sorts of shenanigans behind the scenes meant that with 48 hours notice, we were told that we would not be permitted to go inside the conference hall. We had already, of course, been working very hard to make fantastic leaflets to give out to, all the people inside. We'd booked our accommodation. We'd made arrangements for family and children to be looked after. So that was very, very disheartening and disrupting. I have to say we were very disappointed. It was also very rude, I think. Harriet, the CEO, had stopped replying to our emails. And at the final decision, it was John Knott, the chair, who sacked us effectively. We now know that, in fact, it was Zach Polanski leading from the front with his bold politics, who told the executive committee that he did not want us in the conference area and that we must be denied. So I'm just going to put that out there, that we know it was you, Zach. And you're so bold. You're so great at politics. We wonder why you cannot speak to women. Perhaps it's that you're a bit worried. I know one woman you wouldn't want to talk to, and that is our guest tonight, Helen Joyce. So I'm really, really pleased to welcome you here, Helen. It's great that
Thanks for having me.
It's great. We've been having a series of these seminars. We're really pleased that you're here now. We're speaking to the number 2 on the Green Women's Declaration, which is sex-based language is vital. And in identifying and calling out this oppression, and women and girls must retain the right to the use of language, specifically referring to female anatomy for the purposes of dignity, safety, and health. Now, you're going to be talking to Emma shortly, and I know you're going to have a really interesting conversation. It'll start with sex-based language, I'm sure, and then move on to some other areas. I just want to take one moment to say to all of you here, thank you for coming, and also to all of our supporters who have donated, especially in the last few weeks when you've seen what we've been through. We've had a lot of donations and it's been really gratifying. The messages for support that have come to us saying how much you appreciate our work and how you feel that we've been treated badly. So I just want to say thank you. If you donated, however much or however little, it really helps to get these leaflets printed, for us to run these Zooms where we have to sometimes buy add-ons because we have so many people here, and for running the email and for running the small organisation that we run. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Emma. Just a few words of introduction. Emma's such a hero for us in Green Women's Declaration. One of the very early Green Party women chairs who was expelled. I'm one of those as too, some of you may know, and we have many in the audience because there's quite a lot of us now, it's a big gang. Emma's been a true hero fighting for sex-based rights for women inside the party for many, many years, and most of you will know that she is in the middle of litigation against the party for discrimination. Emma, all over to you, and thanks so much for hosting us tonight.
Thanks, Jude. That's great. So our guest is Helen Joyce tonight. We're really excited about that because I'm sure that most of you will have heard of Helen. If you haven't, where have you been for the last few years? Helen is the author of the excellent book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, or you might have seen her on the television talking sense. But for the benefit of the participants who are not so familiar with your work, Helen, can you just give us a few words of introduction about who you are and what you've been up to?
Sure. So before I ever noticed that there was anything up with gender, I was a journalist at The Economist. I started there in 2005 and I did various jobs there, education correspondent. Then I went out to Brazil as a foreign correspondent, and then I edited the international section and then the finance section and finally the Britain section of the paper. So while I was international editor, I was asked to find someone to write a piece about why kids had started to identify as trans, and that was the first I'd heard of this phenomenon. This was 2017, and I got kind of interested just by what seemed to me to be a logical contradiction, which is, if trans women are women, then men are women, then woman means nothing. But I was very unsure about it because everybody that I thought I agreed with on other things didn't agree with me on this one. So it took me a year really to say anything about it, at which point I wrote an article which ended up in Quillette in 2018. And that, looking back, that was kind of the germ of the idea of my book, which I decided to write in 2019 when I first met detransitioners. And The Economist was very supportive of me. It didn't treat me like Hadley Freeman was treated or Suzanne Moore was treated or any of the other journalists. I couldn't write about it, but that's fair enough because The Economist has no bylines. So we don't allow people who are associated with one side of an argument to write on that argument. And then after my book came out, I just realised that, my hope that I'd write it all down and get it out of my head and never have to think about it again wasn't going to come about. So I took a leave of absence to work with Sex Matters and didn't go back to The Economist, and I've been with them now since 2022.
Fantastic. Now, just for the benefit of people who are here for Helen Joyce and are not quite sure who the Green Women's Declaration are, I would just say Green Women's Declaration are a group that are made up of party members from the Green Party. Some of us have been suspended and expelled, though. We're a kind of advocacy group for women and for green environmental values. We've set up as a lobby group because the Green Party has quite extreme policies on trans rights and very poor policies on women's rights. So for those of you that are not quite familiar with the Green Party policies, I'm just going to tell you a few of the policies. This is where the Green Party's at and what we're up against. Zach likes to distance himself from reform, as some of you will have heard, but our policies on prostitution are similar to reforms. It's decriminalisation of prostitution. Now, a lot of us support the Nordic model now and don't agree with the decriminalisation. Now, the Green Party has no section on women's rights. This year, a motion was brought to introduce a section on women's rights. We tried to get one in at conference, but it was ruled out of order, and complaints were made for us even bringing the motion to put on the agenda for them because it was considered to be transphobic. Now, in contrast, there's a long chapter on trans rights, and it's added to at every conference. And this year, policy on trans healthcare was voted through, which advocates for giving puberty blockers and hormones to children and young people. And really, if you want to be horrified, I would go and read the trans policy, which has now been adopted by the Green Party. Now, Green Party policy is trans men are men, trans women are women, and non-binary identities are valid, though I think that may now have been changed to non-binary identities are non-binary. The Green Party supports self-ID without any medical or bureaucratic barriers. So if you declare that you're a woman, if you're a man and you declare that you're a woman, then you're a woman, basically. Green Party policy is to propose stronger protections for trans people, public education on transphobia, and the removal of single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act. And this is where we're at. So in sports and things like that, if a man self-IDs as a woman, he gets to play in the women's team and women's sports. And that's where the Green Party is. So the Green Women's Declaration number 2 is sex-based language is vital. But in the Green Party, we seem to have a policy that words mean whatever the Green Party want them to mean. And this means, as I read it, that the Green Party thinks that being a woman, is a performative costume that any man can wear. And sex and gender are frequently conflated. Although our leaders have started to say that sex and gender are different, but you still cannot say in the Green Party that a trans woman is male, because that's called misgendering, or it is called disrespectful. And Zach Polanski has said there's no place in the Green Party for people who say that trans women are men. Now, Helen, you said that I listened to your podcast and you said that communication has failed if you say things in a way that disengages people. But how do we engage with people in a party that insists we must use the language from within the ideology in order to avoid being suspended or expelled? For example, would you use the cis and trans terms, Or should we worry about upsetting people who have a performative meltdown when you misgender them? Or should we stick to using the correct sex terms even if we risk being suspended? What do you think?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm really interested in is I teach writing and I do media training. And before you start to think about what it is that you want to say, you have to understand what the person on the other side and where they are, because your audience is very important to you. And if your audience isn't going to listen to you, you're not going to be able to communicate. So there are situations in which I think that we have to not use the language that we would prefer to use. And one of those examples would be if you want to talk to children. If you want to actually engage, if you ever wanted to talk to a group of indoctrinated 14, 15-year-olds, the price of getting in the door is to not misgender. So when I talk to people at Transgender Trend, for example, that's what they say. Now, nobody ever asks me in to talk to 14, 15-year-olds, so I have the enormous luxury of just saying that I wouldn't do it. But that's just one example. An example for me would be if I were to invite someone to my home, then I would, I rate the obligations of hospitality very highly. So I just wouldn't invite them if I wasn't going to be willing to go along with what it was that they felt they wanted to be called. Again, it doesn't come up. It used to occasionally, but it doesn't anymore. But a general messaging principle is that when you are speaking on the other person's turf, in their framing, you're losing. So it's not a question of using your language to say their things or even debunking what they say. What you've got to do is just to refuse to play on their pitch at all, to refuse to play their game at all. So if someone says to you something like, but it's cis men who are who are the big risk for women, that's already a framing that's in their language. And if you stop and try and debunk it, you're just reinforcing their message, which is that these are meaningful framings. So you can't say something like, well, I reject the whole framing of cis and trans, or, cis men to me just means men, or something like that. You just say, I'm not talking about that. And you get yourself back to what you are talking about.
Yeah.
So, and ideally without doing even the bridge of I'm not talking about that. So if someone says, why don't you care about trans rights? Don't even bother with the I'm not against trans rights, I'm for everybody's rights. Just get right back to I'm talking about women's rights. And just keep moving yourself back to your framing rather than trying to say what they're trying to get you to talk about, whether that's in their language or your language. Just say what you want to say.
I think that's very good advice. And even though some of us have been suspended and expelled, I think it's the Green Party is finding out it's on a sticky wicket there, because I've been expelled for using correct sex language, and the Green Party is being taken to court over that. And there are other court cases, so it's tough. But I think we have to stick to it, and they can't kick
And
us.
they probably still do have some hangovers of reality-based language. Like they probably still talk about male violence against women.
Hmm.
So
Well, yes, I
if there are
think they
things,
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
and of course they don't mean the right thing by that, but the language is right and the original meaning is right. So to the extent that you can say, I'm here to talk about male violence against women and we need to protect all women, and that really does mean excluding all men or something like that, and just refuse to get into any conversations about cis or trans.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I've got, because we're talking about language, there are another few words that I think have been misused. A word that's been chucked around recently about our new leader, Zach Polanski, is charisma. And I was thinking about this, and various people have been called charismatic, and we seem to want to have a charismatic leader, like Boris Johnson or someone like that. But it seems to me that once you apply the term charismatic to someone, they can get away with saying anything they want. And what I've noticed as well is it seems to be a term that's attributed more to men than to women. And do you think that analysis is right? And how, in the age where politics seems to be almost entirely about show business and sound bites, do we ensure that women's voices are heard? Because women do tend to be less confident, and gender critical women in particular have the added hurdle of being branded as bigots. So how, as women, do we break through and become those leaders that people will respect?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bigger problem, which is that there's a whole range of personas that are available to men when they're in leadership positions or in the media. You can be the mad scientist or the the truculent father who's just standing up for his kids or things like that, and they just aren't, or the wise elder, like these aren't available for women. Like, women are allowed to be basically either young and beautiful or else motherly types who put everybody else ahead of themselves.
Yeah.
And when you're doing a performance, and I mean, I think being the leader of a political party is a performance, and certainly being on the media is a performance, you have to work out what's a suitable persona for you, and then you have to inhabit that. So, men get a big range, like they can turn up with their hair unkempt and, unshaven and, the suit not fitting and things like that. And people would just go, gosh, she's eccentric. Like eccentric's another one that women don't like. Mary Beard is the sole woman who's allowed to be eccentric. And we did a lot of thinking about that when we did some media training with not just Sex Matters, but other people in allied organisations. And we are allowed to do some things like, to be the charity CEO. That's a role a woman is allowed to do. So she can be serious, authoritative, not very smiley. Doesn't have, to be that smiley as that person because women are meant to be very smiley. You can be, firm and motherly. That's kind of my shtick. Fiona's kind of just very frank speaking and forthright, but just still very likable. And this is all totally superficial shit, honestly.
Yeah.
But that's the price of engaging with the media. Like most interviews are like 90 seconds, and most of the time you're just trying to say three things that you want to get across, and you want them to be heard and or read if you're writing. And it's on you to think about how you do that because the audience owes you nothing.
Yeah.
So if the price is thinking, where are they? What's the language I have to use to land with them? How do I present myself and my organisation so that they will listen with as open a mind as possible? Then that's what you've got to do. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine, but you're only going to be talking in your own circles.
Yeah. Yeah, it is difficult because I mean, for instance, the Green Women's Declaration, one of the things that they said about us when they banned our stall was that we had been hostile and confrontational. And, it really doesn't take a lot as a middle-aged woman to be considered hostile and confrontational.
You
And
just have to say
actually,
no, that's all.
yeah, I apologise to Sue for that because to Nicola, because Nicola really dislikes it when we say like we're middle-aged women, as if we are, somehow that is a persona that is kind of like going to be gentle and always like do what people ask you to do and things like that. But it is a tricky one because it really doesn't take a lot to be considered hostile and confrontational, and those words
Totally.
themselves are weaponized.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, like Graham Linehan is probably the man who has had the most grief on this. But I mean, Graham's pretty damn fighty.
Yeah,
Like he gets about the same level of grief, I think, as Kathleen Stock did. And if you compare what the two of them say, Graham is 1,000 times more direct,
yeah,
shouty, fighty. I love Graham. This is not me criticizing him. Kathleen was so measured, so kind, so academic in her tone, and yet she was treated as if she had been shouting her head off. There's a total double standard here. But I mean, as someone who works for a single issue charity, something that really helps me is just remembering I'm not here to fix the world, and anyway, I can't. I'm just here to do one thing.
yeah,
And so that gives me that gives me the willingness to play the game. It's not going to help me to be heard to sound confrontational, and I'm reasonably good at sounding calm and kind of friendly but a bit authoritative and not getting knocked off my stride. So I just do that. I just lean into that. I haven't ever been called confrontational or aggressive. I mean, I've been called genocidal, but that's different.
Another thing that we get called quite a lot is fascists or far right. And, it's funny in the Green Party because there's a constant hand wringing of how do we get diverse range of people engaged, especially how do we talk to the working class, how do we talk to ethnic minorities, how do we get lots of different people engaged. But at the same time, you see our leaders increasingly seem to write off swathes of people as far right or fascists, with the implication that once those people are branded as far right, they're not worth engaging with at all. So, do you think there should be a moratorium on the use of the word fascist? And does it trouble you that there's almost been a forced teaming of gender critical views with being far right? Or is that so ridiculous that we should just ignore it? We get called Trump lovers, and because we agree on one thing, that sex is real. it's somehow you're far right.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that worries me about it is that the words far right and fascist are rapidly losing all meaning.
Mm,
Like maybe that trick works for a while. People who haven't been following or paying any attention and who haven't noticed that certain organizations that used to have a good name, like the Southern Poverty Law Centre or Stonewall, really don't have a good name anymore and have lost that good name by their own behavior. So people will see, oh, Southern Poverty Law Centre says that the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine is a far-right organisation, and they'll think, oh, that's right, I've never heard of it, and this reputable organisation says it. But that's a trick with diminishing returns. And I think those returns are very much diminishing already. And I think a lot of people, especially in this country, and especially since the For Women Scotland judgment, which our polling showed really most people agree with it, just now just think like you call somebody far right and it doesn't mean anything. But the thing is, there are far right people, and they are emboldened at the moment by things that are happening. You
yeah.
know, so that's scary to have lost that word. I mean, I wish we could have a moratorium, or I wish we could go back to using it to mean its original meaning. But I'm not the boss of anybody except myself. So I return to my advice that you find your own message, you find the message, you find the words that get it to the people that you're wishing to speak to, and you simply refuse to engage in any framing that's not your own.
Yeah, that's a good
So,
idea.
I mean, people say that Sex Matters is funded by the, American far right. This is not true.
Yeah.
But even engaging with that is kind of giving it some credence. So if somebody puts that allegation, I would say, Sex Matters has a variety of funding sources. More than half the funding still comes from our original source of funding, which is small donations from large numbers of women in this country who agree with what we're doing. And then just stop. Just don't join in. Just don't dignify stupid questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's because it is difficult, we've seen splits, even seen sort of some of the left-wing women, those terms are also losing what it means to be left and
I do
right.
know what you mean, though.
They
Yeah.
are they are very worried about, these associations, and it's just a shame that it was programmed by Matt Walsh or filmed by Matt Walsh that, asks the question, what is a woman? And then people associate, if you like that film, then you're with the right wing. And it's really difficult to kind of get over that. But I think we do need to get over it, as you say.
I would add that there's a sort of a truism in politics and in campaigning that nobody knows what you're saying. Hardly anyone has ever heard of anything. Like if you take any subject at all and you put it to people in opinion polls, they haven't heard of it. They don't know what's going on. Like we did opinion polling recently with young people, and there was a very high awareness that something had happened about women's rights and trans rights, but not one person said Supreme Court and not one person said judgment. They kept saying bill or act or law. And that's very high awareness for something. So, most people haven't heard of Matt Walsh. Most people
Yeah.
have no idea who's saying anything. All you do is just decide what is your message and just keep saying it. And don't worry about anything past that. And you'll have to say it for 10 years over about 100,000 times before anyone hears it. It gets very boring, but it's true.
Yeah, I guess so, because we're so in our bubbles,
Yeah,
it's
no,
very difficult to know.
no,
Um,
hardly anyone has ever heard about anything. Absolutely. Focus groups are the most useful thing for this. Tony Blair used to say that the point at which you literally couldn't bear the idea of saying whatever it was again was around the point that the average person had started to notice that there was something going on.
oh God, that's a bit
I
depressing.
know,
We'll spend the
I know,
next
but on
10
the other
years
hand, it just
thinking.
means that you just keep saying what you want to say. You need your sort of elevator pitch of what it is that Green Women's Declaration is for, not what it's against, what it's for. You've
Yeah,
got your declarations. Turn those into, a variety of different ways of saying it so that anytime you're asked, you can just say them in a way that suits the question and just keep saying them.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you about one of your GenSpec talks. You gave a talk at GenSpec a while ago, which I thought was fascinating, and which you described gender healthcare as tooth fairy medicine. And I thought your analysis of the medical model, you almost said it was a sham. It was what people think is happening is that patients go to a doctor and the doctor diagnoses what is wrong with the patient. But in contrast with gender identity ideology, the patient goes to the doctor and gives the doctor their own self-diagnosis. Then they go through the system and the diagnosis has been almost rubber stamped. Now, I feel the same has happened to the Green Party, where there's a structure that supposedly supports democracy and free speech, in which the governance bodies are democratic and guided by the members. But in reality, members have so little engagement that there's very little scrutiny over what's happening, and the party is controlled by a tiny handful of people who bend the rules to suit their agenda and throw out anyone who challenges that. Now, my question is, do you think that since the Cass review, this subversion of the medical model is being fixed in the NHS? And can that fix be applied to a party like the Greens or other institutions that purport to advocate for women while really they're doing the opposite? But if you could just explain a little bit about what you meant by the medical model.
The tooth fairy thing. Yeah, so I didn't invent that expression. Now, I can't, Harriet Hall, I think was her name. She's dead now. She died a couple of years ago. She was a very, very well-known doctor who worked in the field of evidence-based medicine. And what she said was that, we're fixated on the idea of evidence in medicine. And of course, that's very important. But before you look for evidence, you have to have a hypothesis. And if the hypothesis is nonsense, then any evidence that you get will be nonsense. And the example she gave was, suppose you tried to work out what was the way to get the most amount of money from the tooth fairy. So you might do a series of, you could even do randomized double-blind controlled trials. You could set them up and, put the tooth in a different place, send the child to bed early, different colored envelope for the tooth, and you would get results. And things would be there because of chance. And then you'd have more hypothesis, and you could do that thing everyone says, let's do more research. There's always more research is needed. But the thing is, the hypothesis was nonsense. And I think that's an exact description of what's happening in gender medicine, because we don't have a gender. It's not like we understand how your gender is meant to work. When you go to people in any other specialty, they have an idea of what it is to be healthy. They know what healthy lungs do, what a healthy heart does, what it is for a bone to be healthy or a joint to be healthy or whatever. And then they have theories which they can test about how things go wrong. And then they can think about whether they can cure it or just do palliative care. But anyway, they know what they're aiming for. Whereas there's no actual there for a gender. We don't have a gender that we can fix. So it doesn't even get out of the blocks. It's like the tooth fairy. The gender is like the tooth fairy. But I think what you're talking about that happened in the Green Party is very general. It's really not just you. Yeah. It's got two aspects to it. One is that a lie was let into a complex system. So, the Green Party has an overall vision about the way the world should work, environmentally sound, what that means. And then that's going to have quite a lot of ramifications for how you think about energy or housing or the relations between the sexes. It's a complex system. And then someone injected a lie into it that men can be women. And that lie then propagates through the whole system and breaks everything. And very quickly you find that nothing can function. And then the other element of it is what's called policy capture. So if you have a goal that you want to change something, suppose you would like lighter regulation of water purity because actually you'd like to pollute, then you find the weakest place, the place of most influence to change things. And that's very often a regulator. But you capture that and then you can change policy. And this is why I think the small parties have struggled the most with gender ideology. Partly because they're smaller, the propagation of the lie has happened faster, but also the capture is easier. It's probably not very many people you need to capture key bits of the Green Party or local bits of the Lib Dems. It's harder to capture Labour or the Conservatives because they're bigger and they've got more national structures and so on. So you've got, a really perverse situation here where it's not just that it's captured, it's, as you say, it's been turned upside down. Like things are working back to front. Policies that are meant to help women harm women. Policies that are meant to be about, believe the science and follow the science or actually ignore the science. I mean, never say never. I worry about how hard it's going to be to recapture things or get them back from the people who've captured them. I think in some cases institutions are going to die and have to be replaced. Like I think Stonewall is past saving, for example. I think, it has to just go and we'll end up with LGBA and maybe other organizations taking over. I don't want to say that about the Greens. I think you'd know better than me whether it's possible to recapture it or whether it just has to wither and turn into the, crazy AI robot, techno vision of the future in which we're all born in surrogate pods or whatever the hell it is that is the next step after
Yeah, that is where it seems to be going.
It is, absolutely. And then a genuine Green Party can rise from somewhere else.
Mm.
It's one or the other, though.
Yeah, I think, a lot of us have been trying to kind of bring back the environmental side of it, and even though we've got lots more people joining, they don't seem to necessarily be enthused by those environmental policies.
No, I mean, it's about left wing and it's about what's happening in Israel, Palestine, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, for sure. Now, another question really sort of around communication. I think a lot of us here have been wondering about how to reach out to the young people who have been inculcated into believing that it's automatically disrespectful to correctly sex someone, and who don't seem to realise that the reality of a society where sexism is prevalent. We met a lot of young girls at the weekend, or young women who go to conference, and a lot of them were sort of trans rights or human rights and didn't want to stop and talk at all. Now, how do we actually teach young children, or young people, not children, but how do we actually teach young people about the reality of a sexist society without kind of frightening them, or making them kind of really depressed about it? So, for example, should we tell teenagers that 98% of sexual offences are carried out by men? And if so, how do we do that in a way that doesn't make young men feel as if they are dangerous or terrible people, or frighten young women into thinking they're victims? Because to me, I think it's really difficult. Until you're a little bit older as a woman, you don't really understand quite how sexism works in society. You don't understand that what happens to you when you are, perhaps you have something happen to you by a man, or you're in a situation that you're uncomfortable with by a man. It's not until you're a bit older that you realize this happens to a lot of women. So how do we do that? Because it seems unfair that we don't actually teach young people the reality, but it is depressing.
yeah, and I mean, worse than that, we're teaching them a lot of indoctrinating lies.
Yeah.
I mean, we've thought for years at Sex Matters that unless we can stop the nonsense in schools, like every year, another 500,000, I think it's more like 600,000 young people graduate into the world believing nonsense, like believing that it's sexist to say that women's bodies are different from men's bodies, or that you must be, there's anti-feminist to say that men are stronger than women on average. Like, I mean, these are things that young people have said to me. All of that said, when we did these focus groups with young people, they're a lot less indoctrinated than I thought. What they have is something like a false consciousness. They have this superficial thing that you talk about rights, that rights are very important, gay rights are important, women's rights are important, trans rights are important, all of it, all of it. And then if you ask them what that means, they don't have much of an answer. Like for gay rights, they'll say, and fair enough, they'll say it's about gay marriage, and then they'll probably tell you something about, there's still homophobic jokes. That's actually quite a good summary. For women's rights, young people, like 100% of the girls, go straight to questions of pay, like workplace things. They talk about pay and whether there's sexism in the workplace. Hardly anyone mentions male violence or, structural things that mean that women get sidelined when they have kids and can't get back in, because they don't know that yet. They're left to discover it for themselves again and again. But then the really interesting thing, oh yeah, and then on your point about men, we call it the not all men reflex. You must never trigger the not all men reflex, because like all men cannot hear you once you've triggered the not all men reflex. So even if you ask a question like, male violence, they've lost you. They're gone. Their brains have actually stalled because they think you're saying you are a rapist. So
Yeah.
we've had to learn to start by, to reframe those questions. Because remember, the person listening to you is never wrong. If you're trying to reach them, it's up to you to find out how to reach them. And we say something like a tiny minority of men, and we can't tell which ones, before we ever get to the violence word, because then the man can think, well, she doesn't mean me. And
Yeah.
then another one we've learned to say is, you know what some men are like, because that links to my second point, which is that young people, they know perfectly well. Like they really do. They're not idiots. They know that if you say that men can go into women's changing rooms, it's the wrong men who go in. It was actually one young person in one of these focus groups who said literally that, you know what some men are like. And that was somebody who earlier had complained about us mentioning male violence and saying not all men and women can be violent too. So they do know, you just have to not trigger them. And what you have to do is to move away from this being a framing that's about isms. Most people are very, very concrete thinkers. And that's natural. We live in a concrete world and you've got to feed your family and not get sacked and, move around the world. They're not thinking about human rights or feminism or trans rights. These things are just slogans to them. They're thinking about how to do okay at work, pay the rent, be a good sister, be a good child, be a good spouse, be a good mother, these things. So you move away from that framing about do we teach them about feminism or why what do I do when they say trans rights are human rights, and just go back to what you want to say, which is women deserve fair sport. Children are too young to make decisions about their bodies that'll last for a lifetime. Those two always work, by the way. Hardly anyone disagrees with them. And just don't engage with their framing and get back to concrete policies that matter to you, and phrase those things in a way that people understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that's good advice. It is something I worry about because I've got two nephews and one in particular, I think he is quite scared about, or not scared, but he feels that men are the problem, and he
But men are
almost hates
great. Yeah,
being a
it's such a
man.
shame.
And it's
I mean, I
really,
only have sons and I have five brothers, and they're
yeah,
great. They're fantastic. And there's ways in which men are different from women, on average, of course, only ever on average, that I really appreciate.
yeah,
It's men who run into burning buildings and carry entire, full, heavy human beings out again, at a trot. It's mostly not women who can do that. Some can, of
yeah,
course. And we need those people too. It's men who protect our borders. It's men who, fought Hitler. Men did
yeah,
many great things for us. And anyway, men are just as human as women, and I hate dehumanizing rhetoric of any sort.
yeah, me
And
too. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's a real it's a real shame that, I don't like the idea of the patriarchy as if that's some kind of solid all men
I
problem.
mean, I've started to believe in it in a way I didn't when I see the absolute outrageous way in which men, like Andrew Boff today, I don't know if you saw him at party conference,
No, I didn't see.
heckling while Sharon Davies is talking about sport, like a woman who literally had her gold medal stolen because there was doping in,
Right.
by the East Germans, and some idiot man at the back of the conference stands up and tries to shout over. And I feel like going, patriarchy. But I know that's no good in messaging. The messaging is
Yeah,
that Andrew
yeah,
Boff is a sexist and doesn't let women speak. And
yeah,
that resonates with everybody. Look at that man trying to shout down a woman who has done 1,000 times more interesting things than he has.
yeah. And I think you're right that a lot of men could see that too, and they
Oh, yes.
so if they could
And
see,
men are very important allies in our fight. I mean, because it's actually women who say, on average, in polls that they're more for, trans rights. And we could go into like why I think that is. But I mean, the fact is, men are allowed to speak much more freely and clearly than women are. So if you want to get messages across, like, it's not fair for women to have to compete with people who have had the advantage of being born male, it actually is easier for men to say these things than it is for us, and they get attacked much less. So it's not good strategy for us to act like men are the enemy. I also don't think men are the enemy, but I just mean just on a pure tactics level, men are very
yeah,
useful.
yeah, I totally agree. Okay, I'm going to ask you something about the BBC now because I know you've had your run-ins with the BBC. And I listened to a podcast where you were discussing the BBC as a public broadcaster, and I was interested to know whether, as a communicator, you think the model where your main news sources are dominated by individuals like Elon Musk or, the Rupert Murdoch press, is that a better model than having a state broadcaster? Do you see problems with the Elon Musk slash Rupert Murdoch type news industry?
Yeah.
Because a few years ago, the entire press was championing trans ideology and demonizing women. It wasn't just the BBC. So should we trust the Guardian more than the BBC?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. So it's the podcast of Scene in Journalism, which is very good, and I'm sure that when this goes up online, Emma can add the link
Yeah.
to it, or maybe someone can add the link in the chat now. So I was talking to Kath Lang and Sam, whose surname I can't remember. We're both ex-BBC, and I thought it was a really interesting discussion. So I'm adamantly against state-funded broadcasters because any state media is just, it just goes towards propaganda. It can't help it because they have to be thinking about who pays them. But there's no media source. There's nothing in the world that, can just set up and it'll work perfectly. I mean, of course, Murdoch controlled papers and that caused harm. Of course, there was the hacking scandals. And of course, the Guardian has got captured by the young idiots in America that it's decided it's going to use as its base, its money base. But if you have a plurality, then you have some hope of self-correction. And you asked about individuals like Elon Musk. Obviously, he did us a big favor by enabling us to speak again. I mean, I was always worrying about losing my Twitter account, and everyone had to learn to find the ways that you were allowed to, use the aubergine emoji or whatever instead of using your words. So that was helpful, but then, I don't find it massively helpful, the various conspiracy theories and anti-science rhetoric on other things that get spread. I mean, I feel we're in a weird transitional period because I don't think that the Substack model is really sustainable. Like it's too much money for too little for each individual. I mean, really, we've got to try to get back to some sort of aggregation so that people can pay what would be a normal amount for for getting their news and their opinions and information, and not have to get like 20 Substack accounts and still not get any foreign correspondence. There's a very, very good piece I read today. Conspicuous Cognition is the name of the Substack. I really recommend it if anyone wants to have a look. So Conspicuous Cognition, and the author is Dan something, and he's just published a new Substack, and it's about exactly this. Like, is the social media driven, individual take driven media environment, is that creating misinformation and disinformation? And he says that basically most people think, or a lot of people anyway, think really dumb, crazy, ignorant things. And we didn't know that when the media was the gatekeeper, like when the mainstream media was gatekeeping. And the gatekeeping did two things. It kept out absolute dross, which was good for us,
Yeah.
but it was also keeping out things it shouldn't have, like it kept out gender critical voices, to use a non-random example. And now we're losing gatekeeping because anyone and everyone can get out there, and some of those people go really big. Joe Rogan, I think Joe Rogan does a fine job of interviewing people, but he gets the most random nutcases on sometimes.
Yeah.
And, there's nutcases that you wouldn't have had in the mainstream media. But then also he gets on people like he had Megan Murphy, he had Abigail Schreier, he had Jesse Singal. I think he's had some detransitioners. I think he had Richie Herron, he's had Graham Linehan. Like he's had people who were gate kept out. So we've lost the gatekeeping for good and for ill. And I don't know what comes next. I just know that I don't get to choose. I just have to speak into this environment. I keep coming back to this. I don't get to choose what I speak into. I only get to choose what I say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You are right. When I was looking into this, and I think probably the same for most of us, when I started thinking about this in about 2017, 2018, and
Same as me.
trying to find information, what is this ideology? What do they mean? And mainly, am I a transphobic bigot? Because that's what I was told. And, trying to find sources of, where we could learn about this, places like Fourth Wave Now,
Exactly.
Benjamin Boyce podcasts were invaluable. But I do kind of perhaps have an old-fashioned sort of yearning for the fact that the BBC almost acted like a glue to where I know this is a long time ago, where because you had sort of one broadcaster, everyone had the same information, and it seemed to be like a communal glue. And we have lost that, I think, because people are in their bubbles. And as you say, where that will lead, I'm not quite sure, and whether that's for good or bad is hard to sort
I
of.
mean, probably both.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
good things and bad things, like with everything, but things are changing so fast. It's very discombobulating, and I think that that's part of what we all feel. We don't feel that the ground is steady under our feet at the moment. Maybe we
yeah,
never will again. Like maybe the speed of technological and societal change is so fast now that the rest of our lives, and maybe for a long time to come, we're just not going to feel stable, and that's a lot of what we're worrying about.
yeah. Well, as a green, I kind of think climate change is coming and nothing's going to be stable again. I was going to ask you, you've said a bit about this already, but there's a lot of women that are feeling politically homeless, not just from the Green Party, but also from the Labour Party, I think, and from the Lib Dems. And Zach Polanski's advice to women who didn't want to agree that men can be women was to go and join another party, as if the individuality of each party didn't matter, as if this was the only issue. You know, the Green Party is an environmental party. That's supposed to be our USP. And the idea that you could just wander off and join someone else, another party on this issue is kind of a bit strange to me. But for women that have no kind of political party, who are really interested in politics, apart from joining the Green Women's Declaration and supporting Sex Matters, have you got any advice for what we could be doing? Because building a new political party from scratch is for women is going to be a bit of a task, really. Do you see the future as being in lobby groups, in sort of women's right network type places? Is that how we're going to have to bring about political change?
I mean, I think both of those are great options. Like, I mean, the effectiveness of the Women's Declaration type things, Conservatives for Women, Green Women's Declaration, Labour Women's Declaration, Liberal Voices for Women, it's remarkable, quite remarkable. And it's remarkable how they work together as well, as you know, Emma, because you're on the inside of it. So there isn't another issue, as far as I know, and probably never has been an issue, where the people in the different parties are understanding and watching and supporting each other through, you know, what are quite similar pains. I mean, people have been kicked out of other parties as well as the Green Party.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, I don't have the patience. I never was in a political party anyway. I'm not someone who has the patience to stay and work within a party, but that's a personal flaw of me. That's not me saying that that's a bad thing to do. I think that the Women's Rights Network is a fantastic organisation. We've got a whole load of networks now. We've got new medical organisations like GenSpect and SEGM. There's the journalism scenes. There's the legal cases. There's an awful lot of momentum at the moment, and also, as I said, it's a time of great change. So when things are changing very fast, is when a very well chosen push can actually make a big difference. Like when everything's very static, it's hard to move anything, but everything's moving now. Like who knows who's going to be the next government? Who knows if any of the people who are leading parties at the moment will still be there in the next election? These are not normal times. And then the other thing I would say about activism is you can be a bit too clever sometimes. You know, it's like if you want to get fit and you go and you look and you think, what's the most effective form of exercise? I mean, that's not a stupid thing to do. But what if you hate doing whatever that is? Like, what if you just can't actually face doing CrossFit, but you actually like ballroom dancing? So one of my
Yeah.
brothers trained as a fitness trainer a long time ago, and he said that they have this motto, which is that the best exercise is the exercise that you do. So if there's
Yeah.
something that you'll do that. So I feel if there's something you're drawn to, if you care about the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the Greens, and that's really your thing, don't worry about whether that's the effective thing to do. It's the thing that you'll do, so you do that.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. As long as we're all doing something,
I mean, the
Green Women's
example I've sometimes
Declaration.
used is have you come across Slate Woman? So she I think that she's called on Twitter. She gets nice pieces of flat stone and then she varnishes them so they're really dark black and then she paints slogans on them. And I
Yeah.
just think like, what gave her that idea? But it's lovely. I have one by my bed with an Orwell quote on it because she sent one to me. And,
Yeah.
quite a lot of people like them and they cheer people up some days. Who knows why that's her thing, but it's her thing. So she should just do her thing.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's very good advice. All right, I see Jude's put a camera on. Jude, have we got questions that you want?
Yes, Emma, I've got a few questions. So maybe just if I jump in and ask a couple of questions from the audience, and then if you've got, have you got more on your piece of paper there?
She's got her mute on
No,
anyway, so
I think I've spoken enough.
Let's just see. Let's give it a go because I mean, there's been a lot of interest, a lot of questions. I'm going to choose this one, which is about Wales. Actually, it's a question about Welsh politics, but it says Wales Equality Network has been well funded, but has had very little take-up from women due to concerns about the gender bill. Do you support the idea of a female women 50% representation in the Senate And the second kind of question underlying this is, how do we encourage females to function in politics? And I think that's perhaps the meat of this, linking into another question that I think has already been kind of answered about how do we as women function inside these very toxic political parties?
So speaking very personally, I'm not a fan of quotas. I think that they function a bit like the not all men thought stopper. I've tried, there's some things that I cannot get people, in particular men, to hear. They just hear it as discrimination and that it's not fair because it's not based on any sort of rational basis. But this, I should emphasize, this is just me speaking, okay? I mean, I can see the logic. Like, the fact is that women have to take time out to have children. The fact is that we get shouted over. The fact is that, old boy networks don't function for women. So these things are positive actions, and we do have positive actions allowed for in the Equality Act for a reason. It's just that a quota, a 50-50 quota, just doesn't seem to have the connection with the ill, like with the problem that it's trying to fix. So I would be much more for things like leadership courses for women, a bit of funding for networks for women to help them to stand, like things like the Conservatives call it, what's their one called? Because Anne Jenkin ran it for a while, Women to Win. I just think they're much easier to explain to people, women for these various reasons, don't get that leg up that men get. It's only fair. Whereas I find it very hard to explain the fairness of 50-50. That's just explaining why I'm not very keen on that particular policy. However, if there is a policy like that, it has to be based on sex. And that's the issue. In Wales, they were trying to make it based on self-declared gender. I mean, I think that women function a bit differently on average than men in organizations like self-starting type organizations like ours. The women's organizations are very flat structured. Everything goes around the houses loads of times for good and for ill. Like sometimes you're like, can we please make a decision here? And can everyone stop being passive aggressive and saying no after you? On the other hand, there isn't a boss. Apparently the men's network, like the gay men's chats, aren't like this at all. The gay men's chat, they could list you, everybody, in their pecking order, and the way they resolve fights is that someone higher up in the pecking order comes in and tells the other guys to shut up. So, stereotypes sometimes are there for a reason. But what we are very good at is those unstructured, everyone just chipping in when they can, supporting each other across divides. Like that's been one of the brilliant things about all of this. Like just people who would never normally have had the chance to talk to each other, who are politically very, very opposed to each other, finding friendship in this. And that's how I think we function. I think that's how women can get places, is by using these networks and also by using men when men offer to help, because they can be extremely helpful.
Yes, thanks. I think that's really interesting. And in fact, one of the things we've been talking about in our declaration network, which it is a kind of network as well, is what the next moves look like. And I think the idea of leadership training and support networks has come up. So it's interesting to see.
A bit of media and messaging training won't go amiss for anybody. I'll happily come and do it for you.
Oh, no, that would be fantastic. No, that's brilliant. I know from being inside the Green Party Women that there are some political networks, but they're very captured. I mean, this is the other thing. You can't be in politics without going to, if it's a training for women, it will have non-women in it.
Yeah.
There's a guarantee,
yeah.
especially in the Green Party. So I think that's a really useful thing for us to think about. I've got another question from a bookseller in the audience. Those of you might be able to work out who this was. As a bookseller, I've been dismayed in recent years about the number of, not just the number of books promoting gender ideology, but the number of books on, for example, sex education or feminism or even progressive politics, which all incorporate an absolute assumption of gender ideology. How can we unpick this capture of our cultural thinking? So, I mean, that's linking back to the whole BBC thing, isn't it? But what about publishing?
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, the network, the Scene in Publishing Network. So Scene is Sex Equality and Equity Network. And there's various of them. The first one was in the civil service. And again, it's a self-help group. And it's interesting how the ones in different sectors function very differently. And one of the most interesting things about the publishing one is pretty much everybody in it has to stay anonymous. The only people who have their faces out there are the people who are already come cancelled, like Ursula Doyle, who she's out there because she had to have a legal case. And that's because it's an industry where people in the publishers move around a lot. And of course, writers are freelancers. And so you've just got it's not like the civil service where you can, just keep going along and doing what the civil service is very good at, which is process. You can go along and say, oh, you gave £200 for tea and biscuits to the LGBTQIA++ network. We want £200 for the, you can just play that game and still keep your job. Publishing can't do that. I mean, I just feel you just keep saying the same things again and again. Look at Rachel Rooney. She's got her second book coming out now of the same publisher, Transgender Trend, as the lovely My Body Is Me. It's just come out, Granny's Flag, which is the suffragette flag. So anyone who's got little girls at home could get that for Christmas. She's apparently signing them at Filia. So I don't have a short answer. There isn't a way of just uncapturing things that have got captured. I just think we have to keep plugging on, do our thing. I got my book published. I didn't expect to, but I did.
Oh,
And
right.
then when you get something truthful out there, there's a big appetite for it. People bought it. It's sold better than the genderist stuff.
Okay, so maybe that's a call to arms for all our audience, that if you feel like you've got a book in you, maybe give it a go, and
Because there've
like
been a lot,
do it
because
ourselves.
mine wasn't the first by any means. I mean, Kathleen Stock's book came out before me, but also, Sheila Jeffreys was writing way before me. And so I'm absolutely not saying I'm the first, but I think I was kind of nearly the first of the reactions to the latest gender stuff. I think Abigail Schreier, then Kathleen Stock, then me. And people put a lot of weight on my book. They were disappointed if I didn't do enough of something. You didn't have enough about this, that, or the other. And I'm like, it's just one book. We just need lots of books. There's going to be dozens of books. And there have been more since. We got time to think entirely about the Tavistock. Fiona McInerney's book called Turf Island, which is excellent. And I mean, that's only four of the campaign stories that she covered. There's several other campaigns. I think we're going to have dozens and dozens of books about this strange moment before we're finished. And even if you're not the person who's going to write the book, that doesn't mean that you can't tell one story, that you can't, I mean, I don't know, do you guys have a newsletter that you would like to sometimes profile individuals? There's the woman of the day. There's nothing stopping you from getting stories out now because
No,
it's free. You can do it on Twitter, you can do it on Substack.
yes, I think that's also another very inspiring thought, and that's been rattling around in the back of our cupboard as well, I think. So perhaps this will help us to think about what we might do in that direction. I'm going to move on to another question from the audience. Well, actually, there's been more than one person that's kind of put the same sort of question in, and it goes back to something that you did mention at the beginning, Emma, but it's obviously a subject of some interest. And I know that we've got Dr. Pallavi in the audience, who's been cruelly treated by the party. What party was our health spokesperson, and particularly she was expelled, I think, because she tried to raise issues about trans healthcare, about CAS, and about anything sensible. So it's this question about getting back to the declaration. We're on number 2. How can we address the issue of the dangers of so-called trans healthcare when we're also dealing with, in the party we see this a lot, very vulnerable people who are often in wheelchairs or walking with a stick or are effectively disabled? I mean, a lot of our younger trans, queer, non-binary Green Party members are also in the disability group. So that group itself has been taken over. And, Emma mentioned that the dreadful trans healthcare policy was passed with no opposition, and nobody even spoke against it at Green Party conference. Now, there's 2 reasons for that: is that everyone who might have done was outside the room, or anyone inside the room was too terrified to say anything. So what's the answer to that, do you think? It's a tricky one, I know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, with all of these difficult questions, you're going to have to iterate an answer, aren't you? You get something that you can do, and that makes it easier for the next thing to do and the next person to do something, and it just takes time. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get back out of it overnight. What I would urge you to do is, you have your declaration, you know what your principles are, is to think about these in terms of concrete policy positions, which I'm sure you've done. Pick maybe a half a dozen of them that strike you as the most important ones. And remember what I said about how what people care about is the concrete thing, that children aren't being lied to in school, that girls get fair sport, those things, rather than, abstract human rights ism type speak. And then create what they call a messaging guide which is that you think through, what do people think about those things? What do they know? And there's a sort of four-step thing. And again, I'm happy to do this with you. I can do this as a workshop online if you want. You think through, what's the general statement that most people will agree with? It'll be something like everybody deserves fair sport, or, all children deserve to grow up happy and healthy without their health damaged and to, make it into a full adulthood or something like that. So generalizing statement. Then if there's a problem, you say who's to blame or what's to blame for that problem. However, some children are being misled by whatever. Then what the solution is, and that can be a partial solution if the real solution is too big. Like, there's a lot of stuff done about this on the environment. So I'm sure you guys have already done all of this, as a party for environmental discourse. You don't want to say we all have to go back to the Stone Age, but you also don't want to say something tiny like, just one plastic bag less a year will make the difference, because everybody knows that's ludicrous. So there's a difficult thing there, like, staging it, what the next thing you can do, and then you say what it is that the happy end point is. And it's a four-step process. So, you're talking about healthcare and you're talking about kids. And for you, the special thing that you've added there is you're talking to people who've been damaged and don't want to hear that by, by an ideology. But I mean, everything's difficult. You know this, you're Greens. It's not easy to get people to hear what you're saying as Greens either. It never was. Imagine what it was like when the party was set up first and nobody wanted to hear you. And they had preconceptions about you, and they thought, you want everybody poor, and you all, wear macrame sandals made out of porridge, and you're just going to have to do it again.
That's what's so annoying, because to me we sort of just about got to a place of credibility with climate change and people believing us on science, and now we've plunged back down.
Oh, I know, but if I were to allow myself to think about the incredible wasted value in all of this, I would weep, and I would never stop weeping. I just don't have that luxury. We just don't. What we've got is every day you get up, you know which direction you're facing, you know what the challenge is, and you just move in down that direction. And I mean, I do think we're really seeing the discourse shift already. So it's not pointless.
Yes, brilliant. Can I just ask, related to what you were saying about the four-stage process and all the rest of it, which I think, actually, I'm not sure the Green Party's really ever done on its environmental policies, if I'm being honest.
Well, there are campaigners who have, because when I started to look into this, the first ones I found were environmental.
Yes, I think there are environmental. I'm not sure it's the Green Party, but just
right.
Oh, hang on, I've lost my train. Oh, yes. Is there anyone doing this really well then already?
Well, I think that Sex Matters is doing it really well. Of course, I would say.
Okay.
Can I think of something in another field? I mean, I do think there are environmental campaign groups that do it extremely well.
I think there are, and maybe we need to have a little think about that as well. I think I could feel a mini conference or something coming on, actually. One more question down here from the question is, how can we reclaim the word sex in public discourse instead of the ambiguity of the word gender, which we find everywhere?
By using it about 1 million times.
Okay.
And think about how you use it. There are good reasons why people don't say sex, as well as bad reasons. And one good reason is the ambiguity with sexual intercourse. So there's, in schools, for example, they never put, and they never did, not for ages, sex, and ask you to put an MRF, because there'll be boys going, oh, yes, please, So of course you don't use it then. So what we tend to do when we're writing it, rather than saying biological sex, which you do have to do sometimes because some people are hard of thinking, is to say the two sexes, male and female, or sex dash male and female. Remember, it's what the person hears, not what you say, what they hear. And I've got over saying penis. I say penis in pretty much everything that I ever do now, and I never did before. Every event has a mention of a penis. We can just get over the thing of saying sex and just keep doing it, and somebody else will do it, and then somebody else will keep doing it. There is no other way with messaging. This is how it always works. You just do it, and it catches on.
Right, brilliant. Have you got a final question, Emma?
I don't have another question written down, but I wanted to ask about how much you see us having to still continue to change things through the law, because I'm sure that people know here the UK Supreme Court judgment came out, but that hasn't had quite the effect that we hoped. And we're, I'm taking the Green Party to court. So there you go. And I know other people are going along that line, and Sex Matters is going back to court. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's a great question. Like this never occurred to us. It didn't occur, as far as I know, to anybody. I mean, so we were preparing, as I'm sure everybody else was, for the Supreme Court judgment, and Maya made this 1 to 10 scale. So one would have been the worst possible imaginable judgment, like a resounding defeat and all the language just completely against anything that we cared about. And then 10 was like perfection. And we basically got perfection. But we thought it would be somewhere more like between 4 and 6. Like we thought that would either be a grudging victory with a whole load of mitigating language, like bones thrown to gender, or that it would be a very regretful, like, women's rights do matter and sex does matter, but unfortunately the drafting is what it is and it needs to go back to Parliament or something like that. So all of our preparation and all of our framing was in that middle area. And then along came this 10 out of 10 no notes judgment, completely thrown. But one of the other lawyers who was there on the day in the Supreme Court, like afterwards, she said to me, and she said it to other people too, I know, she said, there's nothing left for us to do. We've won. Oh my God. It turned out that absolutely everybody who had written a terrible policy just went, sex, you say? Male and female. Ooh. I mean, we ended up calling it we're setting up a short life working group and working at pace, or we're setting up a task and finish group and working at pace. Because we wrote to so many organizations, and they're like, oh, it's going to be really hard to work out how to fix our policies here. We've set up a task and finish group and it's working at pace. I guess they just, they had pushed this stuff for 10 years and 15 years, and they couldn't just turn around and say to the people that they had entitled inside their own organizations and the partner organizations that they had brought in, oh, that was all nonsense, wasn't it? Like, tomorrow I'm going to go in and tell the men I told could use the women's toilets, that they can't anymore.
yeah.
Like, they said that anybody who said that was a very bad person. And the women that we bullied and said that, they're going to have to stay silent or lose their jobs, we're not going to go back to them and say they were right. And it turned out that loads of people didn't understand. Like, they don't, like, most people don't know what the Supreme Court is. Oh, this is a good one. I saw somebody talking about going around to shops, to places like Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis, and places that had got rid of the women's changing rooms, and going up to the sales assistants and saying, why are you still letting men into the women's changing rooms? Haven't you heard of the Supreme Court judgment? And I'm going to ask you both, Emma and Jude, what was the 100% top response? Like, literally the thing that every single sales assistant said in response. What do you think, Jude? Have a go.
Oh, but isn't that against the law?
What about you, Emma?
No, I would say that they would still be sticking with trans women and women, though. I don't know.
No, the thing they said was, do we have a Supreme Court in this country?
Oh, right.
You cannot overestimate the extent to which people literally don't know what's going on. They just don't know. Most people don't know anything about anything. Think about something that's not your interest. Think about something like monetary policy and inflation targeting. Do you know how that works? Do you know what the Monetary Policy Committee does? Would you
Not
be
a
able to
clue.
explain it?
No.
Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
still,
That's
yeah.
how most people feel about our issue. They literally know nothing. So they were told, because they got Stonewall in, that the law requires you to do this. They did it. Now something has happened and people are coming along and saying to them, that's not right. And they're like, oh, well, I'll ask the LGBTQIA++ network to deal with this. Like, they just don't know. It's just going to take us ages. But it is starting.
Yeah.
It is definitely starting. We're taking strategic cases, like we've chosen a few particular ones to illustrate specific points. For example, the Hampstead Ponds. There's a great example in practice of how you can have women only, men only, and mixed.
Yeah.
So so we're going to have to use the courts for a while longer. Think about what happened when the Race Relations Act came in. It wasn't like everybody stopped discriminating against black people. It was a decade of what were called industrial tribunals, now employment tribunals. We're just going to have to make it stick.
Yes.
Oh, such a lot of work.
I know, and so pointless and stupid. Shouldn't have to do any of it. However, we didn't get to choose.
No, we didn't get to choose. I think we're going to wrap up now, actually, because we're very near our finish, aren't we? I've got a couple of wrapping up announcements. One is to say thank you very much for you coming, Helen. It's been really, really lovely. And thank you for all those brilliant questions, Emma. I've been asked by members of our committee to just make a kind of, to say to everybody that Emma's been fighting very hard for many, many years against this Green Party persecution. And you do have a crowdfunder, Emma. I know it's out there on the interweb, and it's quite easy to find. And if anyone wants to donate, that would be great. I know that Emma's currently getting ready to go into the first round of battle with the Green Party, something she shouldn't have to do. And we all, really appreciate how hard it is and how difficult it is in these circumstances. So just to let everybody know, I don't know if we can put a link into can the tech team put a link in at this stage? I don't know whether that can happen. The other thing is that we're having another webinar with the next number in the leaflet that we're looking at is all about lesbians. Well, that'll be good, won't it? So lesbians are same-sex attracted. Lesbians are by definition women who are same-sex attracted and are entitled to organise and create spaces based on that definition. Yes, and the person who's going to be our speaker there will be Kate Harris from the Lesbian, Gay and Bisexual Alliance, the LGB Alliance, an organisation that we respect a great deal. Of course, we know that our many leaderships in the Green Party call that organisation a hate group, and would certainly not allow them at Green Party conference. So, let's get talking about that, I think. And then I think finally just to say thank you for everyone for coming. And it's been really, really interesting to hear such a lot of, it seems like a small topic, but you've expanded it really wonderfully, I think, Emma and Helen, into a really rounded conversation. And I think we will take you up on that offer at some point to come back, Helen, and talk to us or help us to think about how we communicate differently, perhaps with our audiences, because I think that it's hard to take in when you're speaking, but there was a lot of really interesting stuff there that I think we're only just
I'm happy to
yeah.
So we're not so hostile and confrontational, you mean?
Well, possibly yes. I mean, we don't think we are, do we?
In the right place. It depends where you are. Sometimes it works, It's
a skill, isn't it? It's a skill, and I think it'd be the next stage of our journey, maybe, is thinking about messaging and how we communicate with people at the top of our party in a way that they can hear. I suppose that's the thing.
Yeah, Fiona always says it as stimulus response, because she knows a lot about branding and marketing. Your stimulus is what you say and response is what the other person says in response. And you're trying to get the response. You shouldn't be thinking about what you're saying as such. You're only thinking about what you say in terms of what it makes the other person think and do.
Yeah.
And if what you say doesn't make them think and do what you wanted, what you said failed.
Yes.
It's irrelevant if it's unfair. It's irrelevant if it's sexist. You are trying to do something. So that's all that matters.
Yes. No, that's really interesting and great. I mean, we'll definitely be thinking about it. I will just say that there's been lots of appreciation in the chat and messages to me to say what a fantastic couple of, you've been having this conversation. So really, really brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. All right, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
We're going to say goodbye.